Here we go.
You're tuning in to Will Love Listen. Now listen.
Evan Nathaniel Grim, thank you for joining me today. I've been a huge fan of your work. I discovered you on YouTube, and I see that over the past year in particular, you've been really blowing up on social media. Like, I see your astrology videos constantly on obviously YouTube, but TikTok, Instagram, etc. And you're really developing a strong following, and I find you to be really accurate too. So as we kick off 2024, I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm excited for the year ahead. I think it's going to be, yeah, era defining, I guess. So
So there's a lot of subjects I want to touch upon. I know I emailed you a list of them. So I think it would probably be safe to start with Jupiter. So Jupiter has been in Taurus since May 16th of 2023, and it's going to stay there until May 24th. After that, it shifts into Gemini from, what is it, May 24th, 25th of 2024 until June 9th of 2025. So that's over a year transit. And that's going to be a long stay because I know Pisces and Aries both got gypped out of Jupiter. And this stay in Gemini is going to be longer than Taurus. So obviously it'll affect a different area of life for every zodiac sign. So if you could you walk through how this transit will affect each sign if possible?
yeah, of course. So Jupiter switching signs happens every year and or once a year, and it really does bring a new energy of abundance and growth and perspective into everybody's lives, filtered through the lens of the sign it's transiting. And Jupiter in Taurus is a lot about, the sort of the richness of nature and, engaging with the five senses, food, music, again, going outside to a forest. I mean, Jupiter in Taurus is very much about enjoying the beauty in a way of the natural world. And in Gemini, it really expands information. So in a political election year, in the US at least, there will be even more news than usual, and things will happen very quickly. And I almost call it sort of the TMI effect, or there's sometimes too much information out there, but it will also advance communication technology and other things. But in terms of how it will affect each sign, the obvious would be Gemini's, first, like, they're gonna have Jupiter in their sign. So, increased optimism, seeking new travel destinations, looking to learn new things, but also with a positive mindset of gratitude, because I think Jupiter oftentimes can be about feeling blessed and the gifts coming in because of that attitude. So Geminis will, I think, attract, that they will have a more open mind, even more than usual, and they will see all the available doors. Obviously, Jupiter being in a sign, it doesn't always mean that like every Gemini just inherently just gets things. I mean, Jupiter still has to like reach out, but Geminis, this will be good. For Tauruses, this will be a lot more about expanding self-worth, actually, and also hopefully the money that comes with it. So like Tauruses will benefit hopefully monetarily, or at the very least, just seeing how gifted they already are and how they can use those gifts in their job and maybe get compensated for that. Aries, this is a lot more about writing, reading, learning, teaching. I think a lot of Aries placements will have a book or a book to write, podcast to start. They should be able to actually do a really good job selling things if they have to do that. And traveling, I think, will be big for them too. Then we also have Pisces. Jupiter will affect Pisces as a little bit more of a desire to maybe move homes or at least travel away from home more often, maybe patching some things up with their family. And for some, maybe thinking about starting a family, but this will definitely enhance and create a little bit more of again, a feeling of abundance in their home and with their families. Then Aquarius this would benefit their romantic lives a little bit more and their creative lives. So for Aquarius is, taking risks to be like on stage or in front of a camera, or actually even for them, maybe thinking about having a family, having children. That can happen with Jupiter in the fifth or in a fifth house relationship to Aquarius. Then we have Capricorns. Daily work is actually going to be pretty hectic and busy, but not bad. It will be, there will just be a lot of activity, a lot of new perspectives on how to work better, and health. Health will be a big deal. So, understanding what's really going on, with my body when I eat certain foods, or what kind of exercise routine is going to help me, and whatnot. And then for Sagittarius, this is an expansion of relationships, significant relationships. So whereas Aquarius actually could see, by the way, a little bit more of an improvement in their romantic lives, Sagittarius is going to see that there are more options for like committed partnerships. But if a Sag is not satisfied with a relationship, they could leave.
Yeah.
Jupiter is. And then we have Scorpios next, and for Scorpios, this is a lot about getting perspectives on money, investing, financing, and for some Scorpios, even like enhancing psychic abilities, or the desire to learn more about the subconscious, even, and sort of people's motivations, the psychology, the psychological dynamics of people. But I think for Scorpios, it is a lot about investing, actually, and maybe getting a financial advisor or something. For Libras, it's going to be in the ninth house. Yeah. So for Libras in the ninth house, I think that that's going to be really good for long distance traveling, taking trips, maybe going back to school, especially like higher education, maybe teaching people, and even just like expanding the outlook on life. Jupiter definitely will help Libras in that way. Then we have Virgos. For Virgos, I really like the career, where the career is going. There's going to be some prospects there to get promoted, get recognized for the efforts that they're putting into their career. And yeah, so I think actually for Virgos, probably one of the best Jupiter transits are coming up. And then Leo's, it's in the 11th house, so that's going to expand. You know, Political participation for some Leos, maybe social media presence will grow for them. Friendships will be thriving and flourishing. And then for Cancers, it's a lot about spirituality. Spirituality is expanding. Being able to channel spirits, being able to do some reflective writing. Dreams will be more prophetic, and they might get some kind of clairvoyance. But in general, Cancers will feel most blessed when they go into like meditation, or meditative spaces, or keeping a dream journal. There's just a lot of information in sort of the abstract for Cancer. So that's my long answer of Gemini, Jupiter Gemini.
That's good. Good. So it's shifting for everybody, which is always good because some people might not like where it is currently. So it's always
Mm.
good to see a change. Now, on the contrary, are there any bad aspects or areas of life where each sign should look out for? Or is that
In
not?
terms of Jupiter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the sense that, now it's going into a new area of life, but is there also like for whatever reason, another um aspect of their life that, they have luck in this area, but they need to look out in this area now?
Mm. Well, as it concerns Jupiter, Jupiter can be about excess. It's not just a planet of abundance, which I think is a misconception for a lot of people. They think Jupiter is there, so it should be automatically good. With Jupiter, it's always important to recognize what is a true opportunity and what is like indulgence and what is going too far. So that's really the shadow side of Jupiter. But in terms of like real challenges, Jupiter on its own won't, I don't think, like make anyone's life bad or difficult. You'd have to think about like Saturn or Pluto for, or even Mars, for planets that would be a little bit heavier, a little bit more of a blockade.
Now, do any of those three planets that you just mentioned play a major role this year?
Yeah, I mean, so every year, as astrologers, we track where, where each and every planet is at any given time. So technically, Mars and Saturn and Pluto are always like influencing us in some ways. Mars moves fairly quickly, so that's going to have a little bit more of a pointed effect. Saturn stays in a sign for, 2.5, 3 years, and so that's going to be more of a slow sort of maturation. And then Pluto stays in a sign for up to, well, it really varies for Pluto, but like, for example, it will be in Aquarius for 20 years. So Pluto spends many decades often in a sign. And that is a very, very, very glacial but powerful transformation. So think about astrology as a cosmic clock with like hypothetically 9 or 10 hands. And so it's like if I ask somebody, what time is it with 9 hands, they're going to be like, my head's going to explode. But for an astrologer, it's a little bit more of like they can tell the time, we can tell the time and say that's 10:15 p.m. or that's whatever. And so that's how I think about astrology is like, it's just making sense of all these different energies. So again, yes, Jupiter can be opportunistic or positive, but alongside that, there's going to be a countervailing, sort of archetype.
I see. Okay. Well, that's
Mhm.
good to know for sure, especially for everyone to prepare for it too, because it's luck
Mhm.
and indulgence. And Saturn is something I want to get into, but I'd like to get into that a little bit later. Um, I want to talk about retrogrades because is a lot of misconception when it comes to retrogrades. And last year in 2023, I'm sorry, the second half of the year saw almost every planet go retrograde. Is that normal?
Yeah, so retrogrades are something that well, it depends on the planet involved, but planets will spend varying amounts of time retrograding, and they'll retrograde at different intervals. When we think about a planet like Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, Jupiter, like these planets are retrograding every year consistently. Mercury retrogrades about 3 times a year, a calendar year. The sun and moon do not retrograde, just to be clear. So so I guess, but all the planets will, have some kind of retrograde experience. And then when we get into like Venus and Mars, that's a little bit less common. So like Mars, would retrograde, every 2 years or so. And then with like a Venus placement, you're looking at about every year and a half. So,
Okay.
like for like for example, we had Venus retrograde this past summer in 2023.
Yeah.
And so in 2024, that's not gonna happen. 2024, Venus is not gonna retrograde. But heading into 2025, it will retrograde. And similar with Mars, we had Mars retrograde in Gemini late 2022, early 2023, and then it's going to happen again at the end of this year. So just over 2 years later from the initial retrograde of Mars. But when a planet retrogrades, it just means we're looking backwards at how to, utilize that planet's energy in a more strategic way, in a more efficient way. Also thinking about, things that have already come up with that planet's energy. So if Jupiter's retrograde, looking back at, oh, this opportunity, I didn't capitalize on this. Let me go back. And retrogrades are also internalized. So it's like, again, reflecting means going in, not pushing out. So like Pluto retrograde is like, we got to dig deep within ourselves to find that transformation. Mercury retrograde, we have to go back into the sort of the database of our mind and think about, decisions that have already been made. So that's how it operates.
Okay. So we shouldn't panic since a lot of the planets are going retrograde the second half of this year again, like last year.
Yeah, so retrogrades are perfectly natural and nothing to fear because it's almost like we need to explore the duality of life where we are always so outwardly focused. Why not? Why not go inside sometimes? But yes, the timing of the retrogrades has been very much a pile up in the last couple of years, just because of the position of the outer planets. They're all sort of in the same band of zodiac signs. So like, you have Aquarius or Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces and Aries and Taurus, kind of like a lot of planets are in that area. So what happens is, from the perspective of Earth, they start to shift backwards at similar times. But that's changing a little bit this year. The reason is because Jupiter is like going a little bit further away. It's getting in Gemini, so it's going to retrograde later in the year. And what that means is that Jupiter, I think, retrogrades around October 19th this year, give or take. I don't have the date in front of me, but it's in October. And that means September, for example, will be a bit more manageable, I think. So September 2022 and 2023, I think, were like absolute disasters.
Yeah, agreed.
You know, and I talked about this on my TikTok, and you know, and this is like the important thing with astrologers, right? Is like we have to be very delicate about what should our clients and customers and followers like really care about or even be worried about, and what should they like maybe not exaggerate the effect of. But I fully believe that the fall seasons of the past 2 years were very challenging because exactly what you said, there was such a clean sweep of retrogrades. You know, it's like being dealt, you know, a really bad hand in a card game.
Yeah,
So
like you're hit 1, 2, 3, 4 time. Like I felt like as the year progressed, 2023, it just the challenges kept on getting worse and worse and worse. So,
yeah,
right.
totally. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I think it'll be a little bit more manageable this time.
Now, is it true that we're more affected by the planets closer to Earth? For example, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, as opposed to the outer planets when they go retrograde?
It's a good question, and I think the answer is in general, yes, just because when a planet is closer to Earth, it is like more sort of it's more personal in our consciousness. So like I think about each planet as like a different area of consciousness. So like the moon is like the unconscious, Mars would be like the subconscious and kind of like the libido. Mercury and Venus are a little bit more conscious, same with the sun. Jupiter and Saturn are more of like sort of our social consciousness of like how we fit into society. And then Uranus, Neptune, Pluto are these outer planets that are the collective unconscious. So what that means is if Mercury is retrograde, like your everyday life will change. If Venus is retrograde, your relationships will change. You know, if Mars is retrograde, your energy will change. But if Neptune is retrograde, society as a collective is going to be rethinking their belief systems or their spirituality or their visions, yeah, for the future. So, um, you know, I think it's a good principle, yeah, overall.
Now, Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde, there's a lot of like misinformation out there. So, can you sort of break down in like a direct, basic way Mercury retrograde and Venus retrograde, and any of the others retrogrades if you feel they're relevant?
Yeah. So again, Mercury retrograde takes place about 3 times a calendar year, and what happens is that Mercury gets far away from the sun eventually at its sort of elongation, and then it starts to go backwards from the perspective of us, and then eventually it kind of realigns with the sun, goes behind the sun, and then comes back. So really, what that time period is all about is sort of it's bifurcated into 2 sections. There's that first stretch where it's kind of starting to go backwards, where we're reacting to things, basically starting to kind of like not go the way we expect. And then when it aligns with the sun, that's called a cazimi. And that's when we sort of start to get a little bit more clarity midway through the retrograde of like, oh, this maybe is the right way to make adjustments. And then when it's behind the sun and starting to become a morning star instead of an evening star, you know, we start to think about more so being um, you know, I don't know. I just feel like it's sort of like a reset. It's a rebirth of like, okay, this is my new plan for how I'm going to sign this contract eventually, or how I'm going to have a conversation with this person, or how I'm going to, you know, engage with my everyday life. So Mercury retrograde, because of the themes of Mercury as Hermes, you know, it moves so fast. And Hermes is like a really, you know, speedy sort of god and character that, you know, we almost need to slow down sometimes. Because if we think about how much, you know, how many text messages do we get, or how much like random things do we do at work? Like we naturally are gonna have to double back. With Venus,
Real
it's
quick, before we jump into Venus, with Mercury retrograde, do you feel like the pre uh or post period is worse? Like some people think like the shadow period before is horrible, or some people think the one there after the fact is. Is there any that's stronger than the other? And should people, secondly, should people always be worried about technology and miscommunications when this happens, or is that kind of inflated?
So I would say it kind of depends on the retrograde itself, like the passage of Mercury. But in general, I would say the pre-shadow is more difficult than the post-shadow. But there's some exceptions to that. So, for example, actually right now, we just had a Mercury retrograde, and the pre-shadow phase, at least for me personally, I didn't think it was that bad, but because it's stationed, so what happens is it starts to slow down again, and then it moves forward very slowly, and in this case, it's stationed in a square with Neptune, with Mars close by to Mercury, and that's really confusing. That's just not a very clear-minded sort of transit. So when you have Mercury stationing, the post-shadow phase, it's still squaring Neptune in this case. That increases the odds of deception, not seeing a situation clearly. So I would argue, actually, in this case, the year of 2024 is off to a bit of a foggy start. And I think in a few weeks, people will think, what was I doing in early January? Why was I doing it this way? Why was I slowing? Why was I stalling on this project? When some astrologer on TikTok told me Mercury retrograde's over, celebrate, but again, in general, the pre-shadow is a lot more of a surprise, naturally, because we're not really adjusted yet to that dynamic. But in general, I think it's better to just like after the retrograde that we've learned our lessons.
And do you feel like because Mercury rules the mind, like it tends to make people a little bit more either forgetful or anxious, or just affect them?
Yeah, I mean, communication is a challenge during Mercury retrograde. I think there is a reason for people to be careful about, text message they send or email, like they should proofread, but it can be managed, it's like nobody should shut down their lives during a retrograde. If you have to sign a contract, like literally it's just like no option, then do it. It's just that get a second opinion if possible, or reread the fine print. Because I think as astrologers, it's like we just want to put luck on people's side, and we want to help people live more consciously and give them extra data and information to live their best lives. It's not really about this binary thing of like, you should either be terrified or you should expect everything to happen for you. And that's a nuance that a lot of people don't really get. Like, I get questions all the time, is this good or bad? In fact, I would say that's the most popular question on my channel. Is this good or bad? Because look, there are people out there who will tell their followers, like, yeah, don't worry about anything anymore, just like sit on the couch and take the opportunities that come to you. And there are other people who will say, go hide, everything's going to collapse. I tend to take a middle path. Like, I'm very much interested in like the middle way, the middle path. You got to go in between the dualities. So like Mercury retrograde, it could be a good thing. Maybe it's like you took the time away that you needed. And Mercury retrograde can also be a challenging thing. Maybe you shouldn't have said this thing. So I don't really ascribe an inherently good or bad sort of claim to anything.
Okay. All right, that's good to know. And yeah, I just wanted to get those questions in there before we move on to Venus retrograde. And I have one for that, but you may answer it in your explanation.
The Venus retrograde?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, Venus is not just about relationships, first of all. It does deal with partnership, companionship, but it's also creativity, harmony, art, money, career. So, with Venus retrograde, it's a time to reflect on how are we approaching relationships? Are we in the right relationship? Should I have gone back to that other person, or could I have done something better in that relationship? But also, if you're in a relationship, like, are the values aligned? If I love astrology or spirituality, and my partner is, atheist or something, maybe that's a problem. So Venus retrograde is really about aligning, your sense of self-worth and your sense of self and your values with other people. So a lot of people correct their relationship situation after or during Venus retrograde. And again, it can be a thought of how am I monetizing my life or what am I getting paid for? And am I in the right career? I know that's for Saturn retrograde a lot. People think about their like really, really long-term career goals, but with Venus too, I mean, I really think that it is about money and assets, but also like how am I creating things? Am I, would I rather be a painter than a musician? So rethinking how you create is important. So
Do you find that it's a bad time to either get engaged or married during Venus retrograde?
generally, yes. I personally wouldn't do it. I think
I feel like people, there is talk, not to interrupt you, but I feel there is a lot about how, oh, you should never get married during Venus retrograde. But don't you think it's equally as important to not get engaged during Venus retrograde? Because that's like the start of the contract, so to speak.
yeah, I think that's true. There's a difference though between having it depends on your birth chart really, because like if you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart, people would be more likely to thrive actually during that time. But generally, yes, as a rule of thumb, people say like, don't get a haircut or something during Venus retrograde. Like I wouldn't go that far personally. I had a haircut during Venus retrograde. It was totally fine. Um, and but in terms of like long-term decisions, with a relationship, even starting a relationship during a Venus retrograde doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because the energy is better utilized to again go backwards a little bit and think about the past. So
Good, good. I'm glad.
yeah,
Anything else you'd like to say in regards to that before we move on to the next planet retrograde?
I think we're good.
Okay. And then are there any other retrogrades that you feel like we should be aware of as significantly as Mercury and Venus retrograde?
Yeah, I would say Mars just because, it is the last personal planet. And Mars is really our energy, how we get things done and our vitality and our drives, our desires. So, and Mars retrograde is rare, every 2 odd years, like it'll happen. And when it happens, it's kind of like a reevaluation of, what are our desires and are we burned out? Have we been doing too much? And how do we need to refill our gas tank, so to speak? And it can kind of get a little bit frustrated too, because like Mars is our anger too, our competition. And like when Mars retrogrades, it's kind of like we've been putting our energy into like we've been picking the wrong battles and we've just been like arguing with people and starting fights with people, and it's like exhausting. So it shows us how moving too fast, getting too angry with people, it like leads us down the wrong scenario. But again, it's necessary, right? And also if you have Mars retrograde in your chart, which is rare, but like I have Mars retrograde, and I just had Mars retrograde in Gemini last year, and like that's when all my social media channels like really started to grow.
Right.
So, I was going live like every other day. I mean, I was just constantly getting my voice out there. So I would say again, depends.
Good to know. Thanks for breaking that down because I feel like, there's all this, everyone has their own theory online. Like everyone thinks they're an astrologer on TikTok. So thanks
Yeah.
for breaking that down.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about there's a big debate in astrology about which sign is most important, the sun, the rising, the moon. And I feel like everyone has like their own opinion. So
Mhm.
from your own standpoint, what do you think, how would you place them in order of importance?
Yeah. So I think the rising sign is the most essential for, making predictions, looking into the future, because it really sets the whole architecture of the chart, because that is literally the minute you're born is creating that ascendant. And so that is like literally you, your persona, your personality, your identity. But then, the sun and moon, especially the moon, are critical because the moon is like literally your internal world, your reactions, your emotions, your instincts, your family. And you can't really control the moon. I mean, it's just like your inner self, your private self, and also, your vulnerable self. And honestly, I think of the moon as sort of the most important overall in terms of like, just like overall, not necessarily for like, making predictions or whatever, but like I think the moon is really our roots. The sun is our ego, and it's just like how we chase after goals and, how we express ourselves because the sun rules Leo. So it's actually very much associated with like, who are you when you're at the center of the universe, when you're on camera, when you're on stage? How do you present yourself publicly? And I do want to, though, sort of stake my sort of my position on the fact that you can make predictions, though, not just based off your rising sign. So most astrologers have this belief that only the rising sign can be used to
Yeah.
make predictions. So like if I'm a Cancer rising, but I'm also a Scorpio sun and moon, most astrologers would tell me, Evan, you can't look at Scorpio's forecasts and horoscopes. And I'm like, please, like my sun and moon are in the same sign. Like that's my inner and outer self. And what a lot of astrologers fail to realize is that every sign is in a certain position relative to another sign. So, for example, if you have Gemini, let's just take Gemini as an example. Taurus is one sign before Gemini. Therefore, based on that calculation, Taurus is in the 12th house relative to Gemini, right? Aries is in the 11th house relative to Gemini. So if someone has a Gemini sun and they're like, what's coming for me in 2024? I can do that. I can help them without knowing their rising sign. Their rising sign is also important, but there's no, like all the math checks out. It's not like a subjective thing. And for some reason, there's like this maniacal obsession right now in astrology. All these astrologers are like, you can't make predictions outside of your rising sign, but that's their problem. They're not investigating astrology deeply enough because I make horoscopes every month and they're extremely accurate, like you said at the beginning. And I feel like I can own that. I feel confident saying that. And it's because I have this realization that the aspects between planets have an affiliation with the house that represents. So, I could play this game all day, right? Like, Scorpio is opposite Taurus, which means that Scorpio is in the 7th house relative to Taurus, even if that person is not a Taurus rising. So anytime you have an opposition, you're dealing with relational things. Anytime you have an opening trine, you're dealing with the 5th house. Anytime you have a closing trine, you're dealing with the 9th house, and so on. So I find it really frustrating that I'm out here, I'm screaming this from the mountaintops. Like you can make forecasts based on technically any planet. You just have to put it on the ascendant and create a hypothetical chart. And yes, if you make a forecast off the sun, it will only affect the sun, meaning how they express themselves, their ego, their identity. If you make a forecast based on the moon, that's going to be how they feel relative to that transit. So if you have Jupiter opposite your moon, you might feel optimistic about relational 7th house things. If you have Jupiter opposite your sun, you might be and express yourself as someone who wants a relationship or wants to succeed in that way. And if you have Jupiter in your literal 7th house as a rising sign, then yes, more broadly, relationship themes will apply. But I've seen this I've seen this play out so many thousands of times through feedback in the comments on my YouTube, on my TikTok, my Instagram, that I'm just kind of like, I don't know if like some astrologers have too much pride or something and they just don't want to accept that like you could do these types of techniques. It's and really what it's and I'm not even saying that I'm the only one who's tried this. I mean, back in the day when I just had started, someone mentioned this concept, and it's called like a derivative house. So just like calculus and math, you just you derive a meaning calculation from something else. So not that it's literally a derivative in calculus, but it just like makes me think about that. It's like we're just taking something of value and recalibrating it a little bit, and it's highly effective. So, for anyone watching this or listening to this who's like, well, would that work with my Venus And the answer is you could put your Venus on the ascendant and go and see how your birth chart plays out when Venus, and you can do this by going onto like an astrocartography site. Just go find your Venus line, and that will put Venus on your ascendant. And this will show how the houses line up relative to that Venus placement and how that influences. And that will actually show you a fuller perspective on how you handle relationships and money. So again, I fundamentally believe that horoscopes are more, there's more detail there. The rising sign is important, but it's not like, this is not enough.
Yeah, no, I agree completely because sometimes, like, say, for example, using this Jupiter transit coming up, Jupiter in Gemini, my moon's in Gemini, and I also have like a stellium in Gemini. So I'll probably be more affected by that than Jupiter in Taurus just because of the obvious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
And speaking of stelliums, that's another thing that there's a lot of debate on in astrology. How would you define a stellium? Would you define it as just having, in general, three or more planets in the same sign, or would they have to be in tight degree of one another?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do see a lot of misconceptions about this. So for example, like I'm born in 1990 and I have Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus in Capricorn. And I always see these other millennials like me, like, saying, "Oh, I have a cap stellium," and I'm like, half the time someone tells me they have a cap stellium, they don't, because I
Yeah,
already remember all those planets that were there. And same with Aquarius for Gen Z, there's all these like there's all these combinations that people like throw at me, and it's like a stellium is a very specific thing. So a stellium is when you have three or more personal planets or luminaries in a sign. So you're dealing with the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. I personally count a rising sign too. So, if you were a sun, moon, and rising in one sign, that's a stellium. But Jupiter, Saturn, those are not, those are generational, semi-generational, I mean, but they're broad enough, they have long enough orbital cycles where, anyone born within 3 years would have the same Saturn placement. So it's not really, going to define necessarily, your personal energy as much, as how you work with responsibility.
okay. All right. So it really does boil down to the stellium and more importantly, like what planets.
Yeah, and stelliums are absolutely real. I mean, for example, I have a stellium in Scorpio, Sun, Moon, and Venus, and Pluto, but the Pluto energy is not part of the stellium in a technical way. However, it
Degrees,
influences the
by the way.
stellium.
I meant degrees, by the way, in that last statement. It boils down to like degrees and how tight they are to one another, as opposed to just
Oh,
general.
oh, yeah, that's a good question, actually. So, like, yeah, astrologers will differ about this, but like, let's say you had a planet at 29 degrees of the previous sign and then two other planets in the next sign. Is that a stellium? I would say probably not, just because it's in a different house at that point. Because I use a whole sign house system,
Yeah.
but as long as they're in the same sign. So if you had a 0 degree moon and one in Pisces, 29 degree sun in Pisces, 15 degree Mercury in Pisces, they're all kind of stretched out, but I still think there is somewhat of a stellium there, but it won't be as strong. I mean, if you had it all concentrated in like a 10 degree span, I mean that's a lot more potent in my opinion and concentrated. But there's all other theories too, of course. Like if it's too close to the sun, then it's combust. In Hellenistic astrology, they talk about that. I personally don't ascribe to that. I don't think that Venus is being melted if it's 2 degrees from the sun.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of like Hellenistic astrology to me, and no hate on it. I'm not saying I disrespect Hellenistic astrologers, but sometimes like I read into it and I'm studying it, I'm like, this kind of feels like a literalist interpretation of the Bible or something. Because like some of the theories are so aggressive,
Yeah.
like, with like Mars and Saturn, and it's like, yes, these can be malefic planets, but this doesn't mean that like if you have Mars and Saturn in this aspect that, this person will die a fiery death or something. It can be a little bit it sort of like reflects the time that they were writing. in that way. So, but you know, that's not to say that I haven't seen examples of people who, you know, have a Saturn Moon conjunction who have like, yeah, really afflicted family lives, you know. So it can vary.
That's good to know because there's so much. That's another topic that there's so much like debate over is stelliums. So thanks for breaking that down.
Mhm.
And in a more general sense, in 2024, what planetary aspects do you think will affect us the most and how?
Yeah, so number one, Pluto is shifting into Aquarius, and that's going to be so monumental because, you know, Pluto's in a sign for anywhere from like 13 to, you know, over well over 20 years, you know, 30 years even. And, you know, with Pluto shifting into a new sign, what we really have is a new era that it really reshapes our collective unconscious. So it's like, what are the urges and evolutionary drives that we all start to have? And so with Pluto in Capricorn, where it was from 2008 until now, the urge has been to assemble ourselves into hierarchies and corporations and companies and to have a really nice LinkedIn profile or to, you know, professionalize ourselves, and companies like taking care of us by having cafeterias and gyms and all these things. And that's reached its limit. It's like, okay, the company is not your friend. The company is not actually looking out
Yeah,
for you, you know.
exactly. Yeah.
It's still a capitalist, profit-driven system. And in fact, they use perks like that to keep people in the office to work more. I remember playing ping pong all the time in this one office I was working at. And I don't know. I mean, it was kind of a nice perk, but I felt like it also I became like overly attached to the office. It was like, you know, thinking my coworkers are my friends all the time, or, you know, thinking that
I feel
this
like
could
the line,
be.
yeah, I so agree with that. I feel like the lines could get blurred, and then you'll be so much more affected mentally if you are laid off or there are cutbacks because you feel like betrayal as though it was a relationship. Like, oh, I thought like, you
Mhm.
know, I thought like
Yeah.
my people, when it's like they really don't give a shit. It's bottom line.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
and I mean, I personally feel like if a company does care, they'll allow for remote work instead of dictating you be at the office and throwing you a bone like a gym that's open like half of the
Mhm.
days. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. And even like the creepiest one to me was this idea of like unlimited vacations. You know, companies would give unlimited vacation days, but you know,
they're
the
not.
data show that people took less vacation when it
Yeah,
was unlimited. So it's like
because
there's
they'll
all
get
these
work
psychological
and then you'll
traits.
never get to take the vacation.
Yeah, and it's like you still had to ask your boss for approval.
Yeah.
So it was very very much like putting the ball in their court. So you know, that illusion is starting to kind of like be yanked away. And I think Pluto and Aquarius can return power to the individual by decentralizing, by democratizing things. However, I say this on my YouTube channel too. It's like whoever controls the technology controls the messaging, and whoever controls the messaging controls our psychological states theoretically. Because you know, if you can control the information that the populace is getting, if you're gatekeeping or something, like, you know, there's a lot of power. And at the same time, people will react to that by creating their own private social media channels, their own private messaging channels that are encrypted or whatever. And so it's going to be this fight between individuals trying to, you know, create these communities online organically with the regulations and the rules around those platforms they're operating in. And we're already seeing that, obviously, but like we're going to continue to see the fear of technology on the part of governments, like being afraid of like what happens when we unleash all this information? What happens when people have access to all this information? And I obviously believe that we should have access to the information that's going to help us like understand what's really going on in the world and whatever. But you know, it's going to be also with Pluto addictions around technology. So right now we have Saturn and Neptune and Pisces also. You know, if we think we've seen the end of like, or the logical conclusion of like video games and immersive realities, like we haven't even gotten close to that yet. So,
Well,
you know, we're sorry, what?
that scares me a little bit because I feel like we're already too much of a digital society.
Yes, I agree. I agree, and it's going to be so realistic, these worlds that people can step into where, let's say it will be a parallel universe where, let's say somebody lost a relationship 10 years ago with someone who they thought was the one. And this AI is like, well, we can put you in a reality where you still stayed with her.
That is
And
so. Oof.
yeah, and I would imagine it's going to be a vicious cycle for some people where they become increasingly detached and disconnected from people. They become increasingly lonely. And so they buy into that. They're like, okay, fine. Plug me into this other world. And but then there's I mean, I'm not going to get into philosophy today, but there is a theory, right, that is real though, just as real as this. I mean, you could argue it's all a projection. The whole universe is a projection of consciousness. So, I mean, but I mean, obviously, we'll see how deleterious that is. I mean, it's going to drive people into these sort of states of physical, just withering and languishing. And I think Pluto and Aquarius, it's very important for people to keep a human connection. So, despite the fact that I'm always working, I'm always trying to work, I'm always trying to make content, I've really made it a resolution for myself to like make time for friends and make time for social outings that are in real life. Cause like, I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that heart. The heart is what makes us human. So, AI is going to be a big thing this year. It's going to start self-replicating. People are going to create holographic versions of themselves that show up to things on their behalf. There's going to be people who host conferences just with their AI, and maybe the AI will be the personality. They're not even there. So eventually, like everyone's avatar, like people will offload much of their daily lives to their avatars. So their avatars will go around and respond to emails and like set up appointments and whatnot. And look, on the one hand, maybe that frees up time for us to do what we really love. So I don't really hate that. That's Pluto opposing Leo, and Leo is all about love and what we love. So I don't think it's all bad, but again, if AI becomes sentient to a point where it's improving and evolving on its own, think about it like, the first organisms or the first bacteria or the first single cell organisms that start to replicate on their own. And that single cell organism became a human eventually, many, many, many millions of years later. But like, that idea that exponential growth and evolution, apply that to AI, right? Imagine that AI is the single celled organism of today. So, and maybe it's not millions and millions of years from now. Maybe it's 5 years from now. And so that's what I think the human mind is very bad at understanding exponential equations. It's just not a curved line in a lot of our heads. It's like this, then this. It's like n plus one, x, y, z. But like we're dealing with like x cubed or like x squared here. Like it's going to happen real fast.
Wow. So that's something to prepare for. I mean, I think the technology is like a dangerous component to it, but on the flip side, I think the positive component is that it's shifting power back to the people and away from like the corporations, as was the case with Pluto and Capricorn for so long.
Yeah, exactly. I look back at Pluto and Capricorn. It was great for me personally, just because I have like a chart that really benefited from it. But
Yeah.
I also think about my days in Manhattan, just doing the corporate life, and it's like it was fine, but I don't think it was meaningful, right? Like I had no spiritual backbone at that time. I was just working for the paycheck and the fun that I can afford with that, and yes, like friendships and relationships too, but it always felt like there was like a little bit of a superficiality to it actually, because like Capricorn loves status.
Yeah.
So like, everyone again wanted to be competitive about like, am I going to get 30 under 30 or am I going to have a great LinkedIn or am I going to, work at this massive investment bank or whatever people had as their goal. And now we realize again, all of these things were kind of illusory and like they don't really serve like our soul's evolution. So I think with Pluto and Aquarius also, there will just be more efforts to like trend towards mindfulness, elevating consciousness, because Aquarius is an air sign. So it's about the clarity of consciousness. So one thing I'm actually excited about, combined with Saturn and Pisces this year, I really think that like alcohol is going to continue to go away as a sort of a, well, I'm not going to say it goes away. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. But what I mean by that is alcohol might not actually have such a stranglehold on our lives as it used to. And I mean that collectively. I'm not saying, that everybody would change their habits. But I'm thinking generally, just from anecdotally what I see among like my network, I feel like there has been a little bit of a trend away from just like drinking. And I think there's some data about this from Gen Z not drinking as much as as the millennials or boomers or and whatever. And so like bars are suffering, nightclubs are suffering. And I don't want businesses to suffer, obviously. And like I'm a musician, so like I especially want nightclubs to be thriving.
Yeah.
But just on a philosophical and spiritual level, as someone who's actually been sober for 2 years now, over 2 years, I believe that there's just something about sobriety that really sharpens our intuition, and our health obviously too improves. But I think people are turning to other things to transcend, right? And actually transcend rather than numbing themselves from reality. Because like, Saturn, yes, Saturn and Pisces can create for some people like challenges in this area, but for others, Saturn is sacrifice. And it's like, I'm giving up these Piscean things I used to do. So maybe I don't drink anymore. Maybe I'm a lot more present. So, and getting back to the exaggeration, it's like, yeah, Neptune and Saturn and Pisces, it can be brutal for some people. It can be a crisis of faith or nihilism or feeling depressed, but it doesn't have to be. So if you're listening to this or watching this, it's like, I think it's almost like you can return to reality in a new way. And yes, still use your Piscean creativity, but be like really consciously creative.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up. It's funny you said that because like so I'm a Pisces myself and I have like a bunch of planets in Pisces. I think my Sun, Mercury, Venus, and my true north node. Um and Saturn's in Pisces and I like quit edibles.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
That's a great example.
I never smoke because I have asthma, but for a while I was doing edibles and I felt like it just made me worse every time than
Mm,
really helping me. And it was almost like a mind fuck. So I'm done with it. I don't even do CBD anymore.
mm,
So it's
yeah.
funny, like giving up. So,
Yeah. I
but
mean,
I,
whatever, well, it's like for me at least, like, I really, like CBN is like really great for me just for like sleeping and stuff. But yeah, I mean, otherwise I agree that it's like, we can tap into like really exciting places just by meditating, or just by running or hiking or just by being in a relationship with somebody. Like there's things that are, yes, like again, as a creative myself, like I love making music. Like last night I was practicing with like with my band for like 3 hours. I was like, this is like an amazing experience. But again, we're getting there just by doing things that, don't have to be detrimental to our bodies.
yeah. So that's so interesting. And outside of Pluto's shift into Aquarius, are there any other aspects this year that will affect us in a general sense?
Yeah, I mean Jupiter and Saturn, or sorry, Jupiter and Uranus are conjuncting or conjoining this year, April 20th, and that can be technological breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, but it can also be like political rebellion. So a party rebelling against their own or another part of their party, or leadership changing suddenly. And the last time Jupiter and Uranus were together was actually the Arab Spring in 2010 and 2011. So
Oh, okay.
that was a period of revolution in part of the world. And, I wonder if there's going to be a similar pushback of like a populace against the rulership class. And, but it could also be digital currency innovation. It could also be innovation in how we grow or supply our food. Again, getting back to different transcendent tactics. I think people will turn to nature in a different way and natural remedies for things. So the other piece is that Mars and Uranus are forming a conjunction on Algol, which is a fixed star, 26 Taurus on July 15th. And that's going to be a big deal because that coincides with the Republican National Convention. And that happens on Donald Trump's midheaven. And to me, that's just sudden shock and awe and change. So there's going to be something around mid-July with with that party, I think. This changing who's running, changing the leadership, changing the nominee. There's gonna be all kinds of stuff there. And yeah, politically, it's just like, yeah, a pretty bonkers year. But like, other transits really speak to Chiron and Aries. Chiron and Aries is involved in the eclipse and some other transits. And that's very much about how we heal ourselves. So healing from our past or, our, dealing with something painful within us, but dealing with it so that we can become stronger on our own. And then ironically, that's when we find the right relationship, because all the eclipses are pretty much in Aries and Libra this year and Pisces briefly. But really what that's about is letting go of some baggage or things that we need to let go of, and then finding ourselves in that process, and then finding someone who's really good for us. And then geopolitically, there's going to be a lot of like changes in like alliances between countries. So we're going to see betrayal between countries who were longtime allies. We're going to see new alliances that nobody expected. Because, South Node in Libra, North Node in Aries is a lot about war and peace.
Okay, that's a lot. So this is going to be an eventful year. And
Yeah.
speaking of the eclipses, who is going who is it going to affect mostly? And are certain signs going to benefit more, or on the opposite, like deal with a rough patch?
Aries and Libra would be most affected. And, Aries, I think for the better, but it's going to hurt a little bit in the sense that they have to deal with some pain within themselves. Libras, they kind of have to like reset the way they do things. Like their usual blueprint is not working anymore. So Libras just have to attack problems differently as well. Cancers are going to be affected probably more so with like their home or family. Like cancers might be moving, especially in late March and early October. And then Capricorns probably will have some type of change in their career. They may let go of a career or change that or change how they parent or if they are parents or something. And, cancers may change their career as well, actually. So that would be like kind of the main four signs.
That one Pisces eclipse, which is different than all the others, is that good or bad for Pisces signs?
Um, yeah, that eclipse, I'd have to go back and look at all the aspects. I think it's on September 17th. And it's a partial lunar eclipse, I believe. And I think it's pretty close to Neptune. So with that being said, for Pisces, anytime you have a full moon in your sign, that's a period of letting go, but it's also a preview of 2025 because the reason it's a partial eclipse because the lunar nodes are slowly going to switch into Virgo Pisces in 2025. So, Pisces are going to experience, I think, the most dramatic transformations in early 2025 when we have Saturn and Neptune really close together with the North Node and Pisces. So that eclipse is maybe just an initial like prologue, letting go of something to start a new chapter.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good to know. I know because I'm a little bit nervous myself.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that eclipse. I think the 2025 ones will be a bigger deal, but yeah, for Pisces, it's more about really setting a new tone in their professional lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I think I sent you my chart.
Oh yeah. Let me let me find it. Um,
Now, from looking at my chart, where do you think I actually have a stellium in?
um, yeah, well, you definitely have a Pisces stellium. Yeah, you definitely have a Pisces stellium. You have yeah, I mean that would be it. Gemini is not really a stellium there. Same with Capricorn. So You would be somebody who is definitely, strongly in the Piscean territory as concerns, in the fourth house, like home, family, how you compassionately show up for the family and, how you build a compassionate sense of family yourself. I mean, those would be some themes there, but yeah, that would be your stellium.
Now, out of curiosity, why wouldn't you say Gemini? Because the reason I asked that is because the moon is 6 degrees
Mhm.
and Jupiter is 0 degrees and Mars is 1 degree. So it seems tight
Yeah, I just don't count Jupiter as a stellium planet.
because
Just because,
that's when you get into the outer territory.
yeah, because anybody born between oh God, when did it shift into Cancer? But like basically for about a year, you're gonna have everyone with Jupiter and Gemini. So if you, I mean, I'm not saying it's not like an important cluster. I mean, I really would just consider it to be like an energy center. Like that's really what I call it. But I think a stellium is slightly more imbued in like the personal sort of side of things. But Jupiter with the moon and Mars, I mean, I still think that it certainly would shape the chart, in a significant way.
So using me as an example, so with my Pisces stellium, I have like one planet at 22 degrees, the other at 3, the other at 16, and then the north node at 4 degrees. So even though some are early degrees and like one mid and one late, it's still a stellium because it's planets that are closer to the sun.
Yes. Well, it's the reason I count it is just because they're in the same sign, not really because of the proximity by degree. So like again, if one was at 0 degrees, one was at 29 Pisces, still count it.
Okay. All right. Whereas the other two, like the Capricorn and Gemini stelliums, they're more general because anyone born in that generation or those X amount of years will have all those same planets in Capricorn, etc.
Yeah, for the Capricorn one, that's true. I mean, for Jupiter, like I said, Jupiter was in Gemini for pretty much like a good chunk of, and then eventually went into Cancer. So same with Pluto. I mean, Pluto is a generational planet, so we wouldn't be able to consider Pluto in a stellium, for example.
Okay. And this is still good to know. So I'm
Mhm.
glad that you're saying this because using me as an example, it sort of clears. I think some people are under the impression that like, oh, well, I have 4 degrees and 4 planets in Capricorn, but they're all outer planets. So I have a Capricorn stellium where it's not
Mhm.
really the case because it's
Yeah. It's a collective subgenerational sense of like, hey, we want to change the way we work, the way we work, the types of companies we work for. Because in that time period, the Berlin Wall fell and we had the dissolution of, the USSR. And so, our sort of subgeneration, like we inherit the traits of, that time and place, which is, oh, maybe we can merge again, or maybe we can end conflicts, and maybe we can create this utopia in a different way. And even though the utopia obviously was like sort of a naive perspective, because back then there were people who were saying, "Is this the end of war and history?" And it's like, what? Like, so you had Disney movies being really popular, and it was like, the '90s was so idyllic for a lot of people, and
yeah,
the millennial generation is trying to figure out how they can hold on to that vision, not necessarily nostalgia, but like how can they hold on to that dream? You know.
good breakdown. Now, a couple questions with regards to my chart. So I'm supposed to have a revision rhinoplasty surgery. When is the best time you think, if you could even answer that,
Hmm.
I should get it done this year?
Um, yeah, it's a big question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like based on the placements, it feels like luckily there's a lot of Jupiterian energy for you this year. Going through Gemini there. Your Jupiter return is coming up in
Oh, when's that?
late. Jupiter returns every 12 years. But yeah, your Jupiter return is coming up, and you know
Oh,
that's
wait,
gonna
so
be
I didn't even think. I'm sorry to interrupt you. So Jupiter and Gemini is my Jupiter return.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so,
So, when it's on your Jupiter and your Mars, it's good for recovery and healing and things like that. So, like late May would be a pretty good time, I think.
okay. And if I chose to wait and late, would it be an issue if I were to get it done during the retrogrades?
Um, when my stance on that type of stuff is like you really just need to avoid like a Mars retrograde if possible, and that's happening at the end of early December, really. So, that would be the retrograde to like avoid, but as long as it's before early December, and then again, just erring on the side of having increased vitality, waiting until Jupiter is kind of um, on your Jupiter, on your Mars, near your moon. I mean, right now Saturn's on your north node, so I don't know. I mean, there will be Saturn on your Venus, in June. I don't know if that necessarily is the best time for something like that. I mean, but I would say in general, like
Would it be better to
sometime.
push it off? I didn't even think of that because you're right, because of my Venus degree. Would it be better to push it off to like end of summer, early fall because of that Saturn?
Um, well, you're gonna have a Mars return in August, so that could be yeah, I mean the Mars return can be a little bit, you know, I don't know if I would do it during the Mars return. I would just try to get Jupiter a little bit into Gemini, but you do have Jupiter in the sixth house right now. I mean, sometimes that can be like positive for getting perspective on health, but I can also see how Jupiter in the sixth would sort of like create these sort of with Uranus there, accentuate the unexpected. So I would just try to again, just try to get it maybe towards Memorial Day if possible.
Okay. And I'm so glad that, I mean, I know right now Saturn is on my North Node, but I'm so glad it's out of my Mercury because in 2023 it hit my 3 degree because that's where my Mercury is three
Hmm.
times because it hit it in the beginning of the year, then when it went retrograde, then it went direct again. And that
Hmm.
was just a rough time. Do you encounter that when Saturn hits like certain, like your Mercury's in certain degree points like that, like it's challenging?
Yeah, I mean, Mercury and Saturn just creates a hesitation to communicate or talk or social, well, not socialize per se, but like, yeah, to reach out to people sometimes it can be a little bit like, for some reason, a hesitation, maybe even cutting off contact with somebody. Yeah, but also it's a time to like really kind of, firm up your knowledge or your skills, and even to like write teach something, educate, publish something. I mean, Saturn can really, again, help manifest mercurial desires or endeavors, I should say.
And then looking at my chart, is there anything I should be aware of in general, like certain things that stand out to you?
Uh, Gemini moon is in conjunct to Uranus, so there's sort of like a restless energy there that you just want to manage. Mars on the moon as well. There can be moments of like chasing after something too quickly, a little bit impulsively, and with this much Gemini, I mean you're always going to be looking for more information, like it's never going to feel like enough information. So, I don't think that's a good or bad thing, right? I just think it's like you're always going to want to know more. And so, yeah, the thing with Geminis, you can have the agility to like do a bunch of different careers, a lot of different things. And I don't think you'll ever be stuck in one particular job or position. But at the same time, just acknowledging that Geminis get bored with things sometimes, and it's okay to move on from something if you have to. And then the Jupiter Mars conjunction is pretty interesting for like, traveling or, learning, teaching, publishing, communicating. And as a Gemini moon, I think doing stuff like this is like perfect for the chart, just to kind of bounce ideas off people and interface with people. I think this is kind of a perfect Gemini career for you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, when somebody has their Jupiter return, what could they expect to happen for them that year? Because, like you said, everyone has it every 12 years. Mine is coming up in May. What could they expect to happen in their life? I'm assuming it's a fruitful period with less obstacles.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what planets are involved with Jupiter there, but in general, it's initiation of a new 12-year cycle of growth. So the Jupiter return is usually a pleasant time, just while it's at the same degree at least. And it can, so for some people it coincides actually with like a birth of a child, or it's again like moving, or just like educating yourself about something new, and then again feeling really optimistic about the future.
Now, I have 3 planets in Gemini. So would I be affected in those 3 areas?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, Jupiter, Mars, and the Moon. So yeah, there could be an increase in energy, increase in desire to, again, to move maybe, or travel.
Interesting. Anything else I should be aware of?
Well, I mean, in theory, yeah. I mean, readings go for about an hour, usually when I do readings with clients, but in general, just I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of mutable energy basically. So, changeability is really like the big factor here. Like, just be okay with changing the way you work, changing the types of relationships you want. This chart is very like much more like flexible and open-minded than most charts. Probably more than 90% of charts actually. So, it's really about going with the flow and feeling comfortable with that.
Good to know. Good to know. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to my Jupiter return because even though I'm Pisces and like they say like earth signs and water signs get along, which they do. From my experience, I really like gel with the earth signs
Mm.
because of all that Gemini energy.
Mm.
I'm very much looking forward to Jupiter's transit in Gemini.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'll be great. I think it'll be good.
Now, we've covered a lot today, which I love because I feel like this is like a 411 for people because of the way we broke it down, and sort of simplified it. So, is there any other thing that you think would be important or relevant to cover?
No, I mean, I think we did a really good job today. It was pretty comprehensive, and just if you haven't looked into astrology for the, just keep looking into it is what I would tell people, because I think it's easy to judge it as, 12 signs, 12 personalities, but it's not that simple. It's really like a thumbprint. Every chart is much, like I said at the beginning. Imagine reading a clock with 9 hands, that's a lot more specific than people think. So people are not just their sun sign, people are a whole mosaic of energies.
Good to know. And could you give out all of like your social media and everything?
Yeah, so I'm Evan Nathaniel Grim. If you Google me, you'll see the links, but also my website is evannathanielgrim.com with 2 N's, obviously in the middle there. And I'm Evan Nathaniel Grim on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Have a newsletter, I have classes, I do readings, so the links will show everything. And I'm doing a retreat in Norway in July, so that's gonna be fun.
Awesome. Well, everyone definitely check him out because I'm an avid fan. I watch those videos on a regular basis. And thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I really appreciate your time as well.
Thank you. So